Hello, everybody. Dr. F. Scott Field here, and I'd like to introduce you to our newest sponsor. The NPTE Final Frontier is the review course that I wish was around when I took the board exam. For those of you who know my story, it took me a handful of times to pass that exam, and quite frankly, I really wish I had an exam review course around, just like the NPTE Final Frontier. Check out their website, npteff.com, and use the code HET at checkout for 10% off to all of our listeners and fans. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. F. Scott Field, and I've got with me today a very special guest, Dr. Mark Reinking, who is actually the president currently of the American Council of Academic Physical Therapy, affectionately known as ACAPT. Mark, thanks so much for coming on to talk about all the great things you guys are doing at ACAPT. Could you tell us a little bit about your academic journey and how it's led you to where you are today?
Yeah, happy to do that. And thank you, Scott, for having me on today. My academic journey, I'll try to be brief because it's been a bit circuitous.
I hear you.
Started my professional life out of college as a high school teacher and coach. Did that for 7 years. Found myself really drawn to working with athletic trainers and sport injury as a result of my coaching. So I decided to become an athletic trainer and teacher, and I started that process here in Denver, actually. And one of my supervising ATs was also a PT, and got talking with her, and she'd come in my biology class and talk about what it meant to be a PT. And I'm like, that sounds really interesting. So I finished my athletic training certification, but then went to PT school at a school in Indianapolis, what was Indiana Central, now University of Indianapolis. While I was in PT school, I worked as an athletic trainer and got my certification. And then I actually taught anatomy and physiology to nurses while I was in PT school. And then when I got out of PT school, I started the whole adjunct thing at University of Indianapolis, and then got an opportunity to help start a new program in Dubuque, Iowa, at a place called Clark College then. And so did that, decided academia really fit for me, and thought I had to get the union card, get my PhD. So I saw a job advertisement for a sports PT at St. Louis University to be a member of the faculty and to work with athletics. So I jumped on that and moved to St. Louis with my family. I started doing my PhD at St. Louis University in higher ed and worked with athletics there for 16 years. Became chair of the department, did that for 9 years, and then had this opportunity to be dean here at Regis University in Denver, Colorado, which my wife and I were really excited about because we had been in Denver, and this is a chance to come back. And, I had been a faculty member and then chair, and I felt like that was a good next step to be dean. And so in August of 15, I took this position. So I'm beginning my 8th year here at Regis University.
Wow. Time flies, huh?
Well, my goodness.
I love that career story because it really, you dabbled in a lot on your way to where you're at now. So I love that. I was an English major before I was a physical therapist. So I get the winding road, and my brother was an athletic trainer while I was in PT school. We lived together at East Carolina University when it was still a master's program. And he ended up going into nursing school, then went to NP. He's now a nurse practitioner, but it was really cool living with him while I was in PT school and he was in athletic training school. We got a lot of overlap, so that was pretty fun. Well, Mark, if you wouldn't mind, the main reason we're here today and really what I want to dive into is could you tell us a little bit about ACAPT, right? Like what's the history of ACAPT? What need did it fill? How did it come to be?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we could talk a long time about that. I'm just going to give you a short history of what led to ACAPT. And if you go way back in time, there was what was called the Council of Physical Therapy School Directors that was formed way back in the 40s. And it was literally program directors that came together. It became official actually in the early 60s, although it was kind of informal for a number of years, and then became official. And then in 1972 or 3, it actually was decommissioned with as the what was then Section for Education really was developing. And the program directors formed a SIG called the Academic Administrators SIG inside the section for education. I think you and probably many people who listen to this know what SIGs are. They're special interest group. And, you know, the SIG was the home for the academic leaders in PT programs around the country. And, you know, there was a lot of sharing information. I was involved in the SIG when I started my career in academia in the mid-90s. And, you know, we would talk about accreditation and curriculum and student professional behaviors. And the academic administrators felt that while we had a small voice as a SIG inside a section, that we did not really have the opportunity to have a substantive voice in academic physical therapy. And we defined academic physical therapy as not just what happens in the classroom, but research and most importantly, clinical education. That's all what we considered academic physical therapy. The ASIG actually formed a working group, and I was part of that working group to consider what could we do. And there were some, you know, very influential people in that group from around the country. And we really felt that we needed a separate organization rather than being a SIG inside of a section, a separate organization for institutions. Now, Scott, keep in mind, if you look at our peer health professions, you know, the physicians have AAMC, the American Association of Medical Colleges, and PA has the PA Education Association, and pharmacy has the Association of Colleges of Pharmacy, ACP. So we had peer partners who had these organizations that were really focused on institutions that had their programs: medicine, nursing, pharmacy, PA, social work. And so members were institutions and not individuals. And keep in mind, ASIG was individuals, right? So, you know, there were some institutions who had program directors that were involved in ASIG and some that didn't. And so the working group brought forward a proposal to the ASIG to petition, to move forward with petitioning the APTA that we would form this new entity, ACAPT. And so it was in 2013, actually, that the House of Delegates but heard this proposal to form ACAPT. And ACAPT then had we became initially a component of the APTA. But again, we're very different. So Section for Education, I'm a member of the American Academy of Sports Physical Therapy, you know, the Ortho Academy, all of those are member-driven, individual member-driven. But ACAPT now we formed, and the members who pay the dues are institutions, not individuals. The focus being on academic physical therapy and how do we promote excellence in academic physical therapy. I'll stop there, and that was a little lengthy.
No, that's great. I think we need to know, you know, where we came from to kind of get to where we're at now. So that begs the next question then. You know, from then, how has it evolved? What are you guys up to now? What do you do? What do you guys push for as far as initiatives and stuff?
So our focus is on how do we promote excellence in academic physical therapy. And that's different than the question of are you accredited or not, because accreditation in any professional group is a minimum standard, right? So, you know, we have all the CAPT standards, and, you know, you have to meet those to be accredited. But those are minimum standards, and they aren't necessarily standards of excellence. And so ACAPT has taken it upon itself to really formulate what does it mean to promote excellence in physical therapy education, in academic physical therapy. So I will tell you that from 2015 to 2018, I served as vice president of ACAPT under Barb Sanders, who was the president at that time. I was so excited about how we were bringing institutions together to really find common issues across institutions and helping those institutions really work with their administration to promote what we consider to be excellence in academic physical therapy. Now, I will tell you a couple of things. We had a workshop that we invited certain participants to really help define what excellence in physical therapy, in academic physical therapy is. And that work has resulted in a document that we have on our ACAPT website that defines what we consider to be excellence in physical therapy. So it's a framework that actually has been now published that says, here are the what we consider to be the framework of excellence. For example, embracing innovation, sustaining a spirit of scholarship, promoting inclusivity in our programs, establishing partnerships between clinical sites and academic sites, and how we best create those partnerships where both entities, the clinic and the academic program, are benefited from that. I mean, for years, we've asked clinics to take our students, and what do they get from that? You probably have been, and I've been a clinical instructor, and that takes additional time, and you're investing time in these future physical therapists. But we really wanted to promote this idea of partnership between the clinic and the academic institution.
I mean, that's one of the reasons this podcast was started, right? It was trying to bridge the gap between the ivory tower of academia, right, and clinical education. I had a bumpy ride going through PT school. One of my co-hosts, former co-host Brandon, did as well, and that's why we started the podcast. Was like, okay, we're not academicians, we're not experts, right? We know that there's best practices out there, or at least we think there are, right? So let's get the experts on to talk about it. Let's see what they think is broken, and let's see, their idea on how to fix it and how to make things better. And it's not just in PT school. We've had nurses on, we've had doctors, dentists, OT, speech. We try to, break down the silos a little and just see what's going on in healthcare education and see how can we find best practices? How can we get rid of some things that maybe aren't working? It's been a great journey. And again, thanks to people like you for doing the hard work. And Barb Sanders, one of my mentors, she was always there for me and actually helped guide me into academia when I was kind of on the fence and wasn't really sure about it. She was an excellent sounding board for me and a great North Star and somebody to learn from. So again, kudos to you guys for doing the hard work and laying the foundation for future generations to come. We appreciate that.
Well, it's a journey, and I have to give, kudos to those that preceded me as presidents of ACAPT. As I think about the evolution of ACAPT, and by the way, we currently have somewhere around 91% of all the PT programs in the country that are members of ACAPT. I mean, that speaks a lot, doesn't it? That, they see the value in this organization. And when you have that kind of huge participation from the academic institutions in the country, then you begin to say, we have a voice. This is almost all of the PT programs. And how do we articulate that voice? I'll mention this summer we had we have a commission, the National Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Commission, that was formed within ACAPT back in 2020. Yes. 2020. And this summer was the NETIC Summit, where we came together with, brought 70 people together to really address issues of justice, diversity, equity, inclusion in physical therapy, in our students, in our faculty, in our leaders. And the summit was just the beginning of the process. We're going to be forming work groups out of this summit. to really address issues like how do we get middle school and high school students interested in physical therapy? How do we take away the barriers to those who are from historically marginalized population? How do we take away those barriers to get into PT school? How do we support learning in PT school from those who may have come from not as rich of a academic background? And then how do you increase the mix of diversity among our faculty than among the leadership in academic physical therapy? We have so much work to do in this area, so much work to do. And this was just the beginning, but I was so excited to be invited as a member of this summit because the conversations were rich. And more importantly, the focus was always on action. What are we going to do to change things? Because the representation, as you know, of folks from historically marginalized populations in our physical therapy community is nowhere near what it needs to be.
Well, so let's talk about that a little. This is actually interesting because, you said like, hey, ACAPT is more of an institutional organization where the universities are coming together and becoming members, right? So how can people then get involved if, let's say, all right, my university's a member of ACAPT and they support it and want to hear what's coming down the pipeline? How can members of my university then get involved? What can they do to help out?
That's a great question. So each university has a representative to ACAPT, and that's in some cases it's the program director, in some cases it's the DCE, and in some cases it may be a faculty member that the program has appointed to be the member rep. I would say most of the member reps at this point in time are program directors, but not all. We have a business meeting once a year where we come together at the Education Leadership Conference and we do the business of the organization. Now, we have had historically a number of consortia, which are groups of folks that come together with like interests, like a consortium on early assurance programs. Those are those programs where, and I lived that at SLU, where our students started PT school in their senior year of college and then did their senior year and 2 additional years and then graduated. So they had 2 years of graduate tuition rather than 3. I don't want to digress. So there's a group of folks that formed of like interest that formed a consortium, and there's a consortium on research intensive PT programs, and there's a consortium, a National Clinical Education Consortium. And so these consortia would bring in individuals from institutions. Let's say there's a person who's interested in humanities in the curriculum, and we have a consortium on humanity and pedagogy as one of the consortia. So historically, folks have been involved, folks who have interest have gotten involved in consortium activities. Plus, we put out calls, we ACAPT put out calls relatively frequently to ask for volunteers we recently formed a committee on advocacy. And so we asked for volunteers to serve on that committee. We, formed task forces to address certain issues. I will tell you that during COVID, I think it was during COVID where the amazing potential of ACAPT began to be realized in all of the resources. And I give all the credit to Barb and the board at that point in time, because they gathered all of these resources for programs like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to live in this world? I mean, I remember it here in March of 20, where we met with the faculty and said, you know what, we're going completely virtual next week. Now, how are we going to do this? And we used resources that were available through ACAPT. And so, I think what ACAPT showed at that point in time is what can an organization like ACAPT offer? Just today, we reached out, Scott, to those programs and institutions affected by the hurricane. And, we said, how can we connect you? Do you need anything? We can connect you with programs all over the country if there's things that you might need. historically, these consortia, interprofessional education, humanity, ethics, and professionalism, education and pedagogy, we had a DEI consortium. All of these consortia were places where individuals came to and had the opportunity then to dive with folks from other institutions around the country to dive into the tough questions that all of us are facing.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a pretty awesome opportunity for those interested in healthcare education. So I think, the opportunities definitely sound like they're out there. It sounds like you just have to, look on the website and check things out and see what opportunities might be coming your way that may interest you. Or definitely get in touch with your representative from your university who represents you at ACAPT. You referenced a conference earlier in the business meeting, the ELC conference, right? The Educational Leadership Conference. That's coming up here soon at the end of the month, right?
It is.
Talk to us a little bit about that. I'm excited. I'm jazzed up for that.
So let me tell you, ELC, and again, I give credit to the folks that had this vision. So ELC is co-sponsored by the Academy of Education and the APTA and ACAPT. So it's not their conference, or it's our collective conference. And the Education Leadership Conference was started with the vision of bringing not just academic educators, but clinical educators together, really focused on what it means to be involved in the education of physical therapists and physical therapist assistants. And so, this I think is the, 16th or 17th ELC. It's in Milwaukee this year. You can still register. The program, if you look at the program, our program committee, which is a fusion of folks from AOE, so Danielle Parker from Academy of Education and Merrill Landers from ACAPT, are the folks that were the program co-chairs, and they bring together an amazing group of people that create this program that is just awesome. All of the presentations, the breakout sessions, the posters, there is just so much available there. And last year I was walking, it was on Sunday, actually, the last day. So by the way, this is the 28th to 30th, so end of the month of October. Thursday evening, we start, Thursday some pre-con courses, but Friday really starts the conference. There's always a big keynote. The Geneva R. Johnson Forum is always the keynote. This year it's social responsibility in physical therapy. Are we there? And Dr. Michael Blackwell, who's actually comes from a veterinary background, is presenting on what it means to attend a social responsibility in a profession. So that's a really cool thing. So it always begins with the GRJ forum on Friday morning, and then there's programming Friday afternoon. We the member reps get together with the ACAPT board, and we do our business meeting. By the way, there's a hot topics on Thursday evening that we're excited about, where people will be invited to come to tables and talk about hot topics and professional behavior and physical therapy and physical therapy assistant students, for example. But last year on Sunday, I was riding back to the airport, and I was sitting next to a woman who was a SCCE, site coordinator of clinical education at a clinical facility. And she was headed to the airport as well. And we both were still wearing our lanyards and our name tags. And we're like, oh, you're going to the airport? We're just at ELC. And she said, I've been involved in PT for a long time, I don't know, 16, 17 years, something like that. She said, I have never been to a conference that was so impactful as ELC. She said, and it was her first time. And she said, without question, I'm going to go to ELC again and again and again, because she felt as a clinical educator that there was so much programming that was relevant to her. And it was good to hear that, right? Because for too long, we put clin ed in one silo and didactic education in another silo, and we just didn't interact. And this this conference, again, I give all the credit to the folks that had this vision many years ago. This conference is meant to bring all of us together and to talk collectively and sometimes have hard conversations, right? You know, the clinical educators saying, your students have to be better prepared in X when they come to us. That can't be our job to get them ready for this, whatever that might be. And, you know, we got to hear that, right? So I'm excited about it. If there are folks that are listening and thinking, wow, I don't know if I could make that happen, but it sounds interesting. I'd encourage you to at least think about it. Registration, I think right now is $350 for members of the APTA and $450 for non-members. So, yeah.
Yeah, we'll drop the links for that in the show notes so people can find it easily and register through the end of the month. I'll give a shameless plug. I'm presenting on Sunday at a breakout session on the student loan debt crisis. So that'll be fun. That's
interesting that you bring that up. That's a topic I've been very involved in.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's the number one most given answer to this next question we ask all of our guests. But if you could change one aspect of higher education, whether that be DPT or otherwise, which aspect would you change? Why would you change it? And how would you change it?
Yeah. So, Scott, you posed that question in the email, and I've been thinking about that. And I'm probably going to cheat because I'm going to say there are two things. One, we have to improve the diversity of our students in programs in the diversity of our faculty. Now, how do we do that? We look carefully at how we do admissions. I'm going to start there. There's actually some work that we have to do behind that in terms of making folks in historically marginalized populations aware of who physical therapists are and what they do. But if we look at getting into PT school, we have had barriers for years in how we did this and you know, what kind of point allocation you give in your admissions process to the GRE score or to the GPA. And, you know, we've learned some really important things about holistic admissions. And we've made the change here at Regis as of last year in how we do admissions. I'm pleased to say that we had a significant bump in students from non-Caucasian populations in our class that started this fall. I think we're at 48% diversity, which is the highest Regis has ever been. But that's just the beginning, right? So bringing those folks into programs and making sure you have the resources to support them within the program. But then we have to have a faculty that look like our students. And that's an ongoing challenge. We are at Regis, we're looking at ways that we can really promote interest among folks from diverse populations in a faculty position here. And you know, Scott, when you go on a website of a program and you look at their faculty and everybody is Caucasian, that's a problem. And that's a problem that we're facing here. And folks don't want to come and say, well, I'm the only person of diversity. And so we are talking to folks that represent that population and help us understand what we need to do. So one thing I would change is the diversity of our student population, our faculty population, and our academic leaders. But then debt is the other issue that I have to raise. And I served on the national task force formed between APTA, AOE, and ACAPT back in 2018 or 19. Actually, it was in 19, I believe, that we formed, where we studied this issue of debt. We had some students that were part of the task force, and we generated a report. Part of that had to do with admissions and how we do admissions and how we make students aware of what it costs, right? So we make it completely transparent. So if Scott wants to come to Regis to go to PT school, he can go on our website and within a click, he knows what it's going to cost to go to Regis University. The other thing, and that's just one thing, is transparency of cost. The other thing is we have to look at how we structure our programs, what the curriculum like, how many credit hours we have, and is there a way that we can be creative and innovative in our curriculum and perhaps decrease credit hours. You know, I mean, at SLU, that 3+3 model is a money-saving model, right? Because the students are only paying 2 years of graduate tuition. Now, I'm not saying that every PT program should be 3-3, but that's one model, right? And I think we're all aware that there are now hybrid programs out there where, students are of University X are all over the country, and then they go to wherever that university is and do these week-long intensives or 2-week-long intensives, depends on the place, where they, work on manual skills or do dissections on cadavers or whatever it might be. Those programs have shortened the time. Diversity and student debt. Those are two things that have always been on my mind.
Yeah, I have to say that, obviously student loan debt's a big one for me, right? That's the number one most given answer on the podcast. And it's the reason that I ended up, writing my book on alternative revenue streams for healthcare providers, right? Because we have such great skill sets. We learn them in grad school. Even before that, right? We learn critical thinking. We learn organization. We learn prioritization. We learn systematization, right? So it's like there's all these great skill sets that we have. Then you take on the fact that we know a lot about the musculoskeletal system, and it's like, hey, the world's your oyster, man. You can do whatever you want. You just got to leverage it. You got to figure it out. Solve a problem for a population, and you've got a business. You're good to go. So get out there and do it, because physical therapy is such a great profession. It's just, you got to put in the time, right? It's kind of what you make of it.
And I want to add to that. Thank you for that, because I need to make sure I go on record and saying student debt is not just a university problem.
Yeah, it's systematic. It's
systematic. And my daughter is a physical therapist here in Colorado. She works down at Children's Hospital. And when she started there, her salary when she started there wasn't dramatically different than my salary when I started my practice in 1988. That has everything to do with reimbursement. And I mean, this story, clinics have a limited resource of pay, and they have to, take in their insurance payments and then pay their physical therapists who they employ. We have ongoing issues with reimbursement, and that's part of, why does my son, who's a physician, make so much more than my daughter, who's a physical therapist? Well, part of that is what Jason's able to bill in as a physician compared to what Sarah's able to bill as a physical therapist. So we have interesting healthcare conversations in my family with a couple of PTs and a physician. My wife's a pastor, so she makes sure everyone, stays home.
Mediates, right? Well, Mark, I can't thank you enough for taking the time and for coming on. And like I said, sharing your knowledge and educating our audience about all things ACAPT and ELC. Where can people find you if they want to reach out or just ask more follow-up questions, or, just want to see what you're up to these days?
Yeah, I welcome conversation, as I do with, our students, our faculty. So I'm at Regis University. If you go to the regis.edu website, you can easily find me, Reinking, Reinking, Mark Reinking. My email is mreinking@regis.edu. Very simple. Happy for folks to send questions, and feel free to send hard questions, because I know we continue to face challenges in academic physical therapy, and ACAPT is really committed to understanding what those challenges are, putting together people who are really smart from all over the country to try to solve those problems. I want to say one thing. We have just formed a Center for Excellence that's doing a lot of data collection from programs all over the country that are ACAPT members. And our intent is that we can understand better what we all do, right? And to understand that you need data. So this Center for Excellence we've formed, which is really our data center. We are so excited about that center informing us about where we need to go.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thanks again. Like I said, we appreciate your time and for coming on, and look forward to catching up with you at ELC.
Yeah, good to see you, and see you at ELC.